Good afternoon, all of you. Thank you I hope you enjoyed the lunch break and you had a little bit the chance to have some fresh air. Thank you for coming back to us for this afternoon session. This morning we discussed patient preferences and medical needs in relation to different stakeholders. Actually, this afternoon we will have the medicines developer, notably two people from Novartis, somebody from the Belgian KCE, so the Health Technology Assessment body, and then I will introduce our next speaker in a minute. So, as we discussed this morning, we need to take into account different stakeholders' considerations when we consider unmet medical needs. And an interesting article that I received yesterday, and we will share it with you, is that we indeed, as we discussed this morning already a little bit, but we will go further in this afternoon, is the financial barriers, because as you know, those personalized treatment come at a very high cost. And advocates asked the regulatory agencies, in this case it was FDA, to consider approval given the lack of effective treatment options for ALS, which is also a severe or a life-threatening disease. So a lack of effective treatment options for this disease and the limited signs of toxic effects of the drug. They argued that patients had nothing to lose and potentially much to gain from having access to the drug. However, of course, the regulatory agencies don't consider the dollar signs. And if the drug discussed had substantially improved patients' health, those financial side effects might have been acceptable. But a follow-up trial found that the drug didn't improve outcomes, and the manufacturer removed it from the market in April 2024. The question is, how should policymakers consider and address the potential financial toxicity of new drugs in cases in which the balance of health-related benefits and burdens are unclear? And I just wanted to point out that with I3H Institute, and Sanae, the next speaker, is involved in this project. We are part of a huge European project where we really look at pay for innovation, and different payment schemes are being considered with the benefits and the drawbacks. We will hear something more about this. So this afternoon, we'll talk about the economic evaluations, adaptive policies and guidelines, the use and unfortunately sometimes also the misuse or the abuse of policies and those guidelines, the need to assess policies and incentives, and the way we reward innovation. Also, we already touch upon the new pharma package that is being proposed at the European level to incentivize innovation in Europe and to increase our competitive position with respect to the US and China. We'll discuss the way we assess clinical trial evidence and the development of real-world data systems to make sure that all knowledge is integrated in a very interdisciplinary way. And I just received this afternoon, and I will share it with you too. It's really indeed what I pointed out, that it's not only at the Belgian level, of course, we need to assess this access to treatments for rare disease patients, but patients as a whole, but really to look at how do we deal with how do we prepare global health systems. So I will stop showing and then introduce to you Sanae, who is actually I would say I was the first for Isabel to graduate as a PhD student. So Sanae will be the first to graduate because she holds a master's degree in biomedical sciences with a specialization in neurosciences, and she's, as I told you, a research fellow at I3H. And she will soon defend her PhD. Her research focuses on health economics and cognitive neuroscience in the field of rare disease. More particularly, she's focusing on health impact analysis of SMA treatment. And SMA is the spinal muscular atrophy. And if you remember, I introduced this PIA story shortly last week. So this is how we will discuss budget impact analysis. And Sanae, I'm happy that you're here to share your insights.
Very much. Thank you. So I'm sharing my screen. Everyone can see it. Everyone, perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by briefly introduce myself, even if Professor Stevens said it much, actually. So, my name is Sanae, PhD candidate in biomedical sciences under the supervision of Professor Stevens at the I3H. So, as she mentioned, my research focuses on the burden of rare diseases with a particular emphasis on spinal muscular atrophy. So, you've heard on that disease, a rare neuromuscular disorder that leads to progressive degeneration of motor neurons, making early and effective treatment essential. And as part of my doctoral work, I study the economic and societal challenges related to the high cost of SMA treatments, like Zolgensma, Spinraza, Evrysdi, which actually can cost several millions euros per patient. And one of my work package is to analyze the budgetary impact of those treatments on patients, of course, their caregivers, and the healthcare system as a whole. I also examine reimbursement and financing strategies that ensure access to these therapies while maintaining financial sustainability. And today we will explore how healthcare payers navigate the balance between therapeutic innovation like Zolgensma. Zolgensma is a gene therapy for SMA innovation then, and budgetary sustainability, a key challenge in ensuring access to treatment for disease patients. Access will be a key word today. So the course objectives of today in this session, we will address actually some key questions. Why are orphan drugs that expensive? I'm sure that you have some clues on that, but we will go through that in details. I will detail the other question later, but what economic mechanisms are in place to finance them? How can we balance innovation with the financial sustainability of healthcare systems? And I hope that by the end of this session, you will have a clear understanding of these challenges and that you will be able to analyze the strategies used by the payers to manage the financial burden of these high-cost treatments. Well, first of all, I think it's important to give you some definitions with some context in order to be on the same line today. First of all, I think that's a key question here. So we will go through all those aspects, okay? So first of all, I'd like you to understand what a payer is in health economic. So a payer is an entity that finances healthcare services, which include the government, through social security services, systems like INAMI in Belgium. In France, they have the CNAM. We have also private insurers like mutual funds and supplementary health insurance providers. And sometimes you have the patients themselves. They have to cover part of the treatment cost out of pocket. And when it comes to orphan drugs, payers will face a difficult balancing act, ensuring access to innovative treatments and controlling their costs to avoid excessive strain on healthcare budget. So today, I'd like to make sure that you put yourselves in a payer's shoes and that you understand that balance. And for that, we will first of all talk about the economics of pharmaceuticals, especially for orphan drugs. And for that, we need to distinguish different key concepts. Among those, the cost of a drug, the price of a drug, and the value of a drug. And these terms are actually often used interchangeably, but they actually refer to different aspects of drug financing and pricing. So let's start with the cost of a drug. What is the cost of a drug? So the cost of a drug refers to all the expenses involved in developing, manufacturing, and distributing the drug. So this includes, of course, the R&D before a drug reaches the market, pharmaceutical companies spend years researching its effects, conducting laboratory studies, and testing its safety, basically. Then you have the clinical trials per se. Once a potential drug is identified, it has to go through several phases of clinical trials, which require, of course, recruiting patients, monitoring their health, of course, and ensuring the drug's effectiveness and safety. Very important. And then you will have the manufacturing and the distribution. So even after approval, there are ongoing costs to produce the drug at a large scale. And if you target the world market, well, distribute it worldwide. So if we go back to our example, SMA, which is close to my heart, Zolgensma, well, for SMA, is estimated to have a manufacturing cost of around 300,000 euro per dose. However, this does not include the years of research, clinical trials, and other costs that led to its approval. Then you have the price of a drug. What is the price of a drug? Well, the price is the amount that you, the payer, the government, the insurance company, the patients, has to pay to acquire the medication. Unlike the cost, the price is not simply based on how much it takes to produce the drug. It is influenced by several factors, including negotiations between pharmaceutical companies and government or insurers. Some countries negotiate lower prices through joint agreements. I will give you an example. Benelux, the coalition of different countries that helped to reduce the price of Zolgensma. We will go through that later in this presentation. Another factor that can influence the price of a drug is the market exclusivity you can get, and patents, of course. A company with a monopoly can set super high prices because there are no other alternatives, right? And then you have, and this is very important and linked to what we are going to talk next, the perceived value of the drug. Indeed, if a drug offers a major medical breakthrough, it is often priced higher. It's logical. So, for example, if we go back to Zolgensma, it's sold at the public price of 2.1 million euros per patient, per dose. However, and I mentioned it, in countries like ours, in Belgium, the real price paid is lower because our government went to negotiate confidentially through Benelux, so the coalition of countries that work together to obtain better pricing for those kind of expensive treatments. Indeed, the more you are at the table of negotiation, the more weight you will have, and you will need some arguments because you cannot talk to Novartis and just ask to reduce the price. You will need to argue some things, and I will give you some tips as a payer later in this presentation. And then you have another aspect, a key aspect, the value. We just mentioned it actually. The value is super important for you, the payer. The value of a drug goes beyond its cost and price. It refers to the medical, economic, and societal benefits the drug will provide. So even if a drug is super expensive, well, it might still be worth the cost. Indeed, if, for example, it improves survival and quality of life, well, a drug that significantly extends a patient's life or prevents severe disabilities has a high medical value. So if you are a patient, you will be super happy with the drug if it extends your survival, right? Then you will have an aspect that is important and give value to your drug if it reduces long-term healthcare expenses. Indeed, if a drug prevents costly hospitalizations or the need for lifelong care, well, it may be economically justified to pay the price. Okay. Another aspect is that if this treatment helps the patients return to work, as a government, you will be super happy because it will actually increase the workforce, not the patient immediately, sometimes just by maintaining his or her independence, because you have the caregivers. Okay, for example, a parent will need to stay at home, take care of the kids, but if your treatment, if your drug help patients caregivers return to work, Well, it's worth the price again, okay? So if we go back to our example, Zolgensma, super expensive, but, and we will detail this, it replaces years of chronic treatment. So it might be, and I'm dropping the word here, cost effective in the long run. Indeed, so we just have distinguished, make the distinction between cost, price, and value. So we can take the next step here and determine if a drug is truly worth its price. This is where the concept of cost effectiveness comes in. I just mentioned the fact that a drug can be cost effective. What does that mean? So for that, we have seen that the price of a drug is not simply a reflection of its cost to develop, but also its value. Okay, so how it impacts patients' health and the society as a whole. However, healthcare resources are limited. You are a payer, you don't have, your resources are limited in a way. So the government, the insurers, the policymakers, they have to make difficult choices about which drug to cover, okay? Choosing one thing means giving up another, okay? In French, we say choisir, c'est renoncer. To choose is renouncing. So how do we ensure that expensive treatments like Zolgensma are funded fairly and sustainably? Of course, you will have abuse, but in a way, we can ensure that by measuring whether the benefits of the drug justify its cost. And for that, we have a tool, the cost effectiveness analysis. So the cost effectiveness analysis will help the decision makers, the policy makers, to compare the cost of the treatment to the health benefit it provides. So such analysis ensures whether the treatment costs per unit of health are gained. So it provides an idea on the quantity and the quality of life the drug will provide. And for that, we are using a metric which is called the quality adjusted life years, the QALY. This metric, just as mentioned, combine quantity and quality. So it's combining survival and quality of life. So let's take an example. If a treatment that extends life by 1 year in perfect health, 100% of your health, it provides you one QALY. Okay. Another example, if another treatment B, extend your life by 2 years, much better, but 0.5% of quality of life. Well, it also provides you one QALY then, okay? So once we calculate QALYs, we need to compare them to the cost of the drug, basically, to get the cost per QALY gained, sorry. So if we take Zolgensma, our example today, it costs 2.1 million euros per patient. Let's say we don't have enough data, enough insight on that, but let's say it provides you an average of 10 additional QALYs, which mean quantity, quality, 10 years in perfect health, or 20 years with half of your quality of life, of your health. The cost per QALY will then be 210,000 per QALY, okay? If the accepted cost threshold, and this is actually the one we use in Belgium, is your willingness to pay is 100,000 per QALY, then you can see that it raised sort of an affordability concern. Zolgensma seems to be too expensive, but we have mentioned the fact that we need to adjust that price with the value it provides. Okay, so we know that Zolgensma is definitely super expensive, but does it offer value? The answer will be yes, and it's actually a yes, a big yes, because it replaces lifelong treatment. Spinraza, another treatment for Zolgensma, costs around 400,000 euro per year. So if you multiply those amounts by 10 years, the 10 years we have estimated that Zolgensma could provide you in perfect health, for example, well, you make the quick calculus and you say, okay, I'm ready to pay those 2.1 million euros. If Zolgensma prevents disability, We don't, as mentioned, we don't have enough data on that yet, but we can definitely say that Professor Stevens was mentioning the case of baby Pia. We'll say a word on that at the end. Baby Pia, she's now 6 years old. She was actually condemned at 2 years old. She was supposed to have severe disabilities at 2 and unfortunately die, but thanks to the treatment, she's still alive. She doesn't have any big respiratory problems, so we can say that it prevents a sort of disability. Okay, it reduces future healthcare costs for sure, but for how long we don't know yet. Another aspect, and it's something I'm studying in my thesis, the cognition, things like that. Does Zolgensma allow children with SMA to live independently and contribute to society? For now, we can say yes. Baby Pia is at school, she's learning with other kids, no problem. The answer will then be no if the effectiveness is uncertain with limited long-term data. For now, as we said, we have some data on Zolgensma, it's fine, we are ready to pay. But if in the future we learn that they have some serious side effects, etc., those are the types of arguments that you, the payer, you can bring on the table of negotiation, actually. You are not sure of the effectiveness of Zolgensma in the long run, okay? And then we can simply say the cost per quali is much higher than accepted threshold. We have said that the normal threshold many countries used is 100,000 per quali. Okay, so here we are much above those kind of threshold. That's something you can bring to the table of negotiation as well. So this is why we need to negotiate prices actually and use risk-sharing agreements. We will talk about those kind of tools to make drugs more affordable. So for that, we will take, I would like you to really understand that a drug isn't just evaluated by its price, but by its impact on health and society. It's really important. And you need to evaluate how much you are willing to pay for a better life. It's an ethical question, of course, but as a policymakers, payers, those are the kind of questions they are answering. So how does this apply to orphan drug? Do they need a special cost effectiveness threshold due to their unique challenges? Those are fair questions. But for today, what we can say is that we have put a distinction between key concepts. So we know now that cost isn't the price, which isn't the value, but all those is correlated. So it's important to understand that the price of a drug is not always proportional to its cost, okay? And that pharmaceutical companies will set prices based on what healthcare systems are willing to pay and the added value of the treatment rather than just the production cost. Okay, this is why we can reach such prices with Zolgensma. And in general, this is why some orphan drugs, despite having relatively low production costs, have extremely high prices. I can make a digression here and say that, for example, we have cases of repurposing drugs. If when it was actually targeting some basic, some normal disease, the price was, let's say, a reasonable number. And then when you reach a more niche population, the price explodes because you have this kind of parameters that you need to take into account. So unlike many other industries, the pharmaceutical market operates under strict regulations and they have high barriers to entry. And these barriers make it difficult for new companies to enter the market and create competitions, which in turn allows those pharmaceutical companies to maintain those high prices for their drug. So let's now break down to the main barriers that affect this market and explain their impact on orphan drugs. So first of all, definitely the high cost of drug development. We have said a word on that, but developing a new drug is super expensive. On average, bringing a new drug to market costs around 2.6 billion euros, and it can take over 10 years. This includes initial research. You will have also the multiple phases of clinical trials that ensure the drug to be effective and safe, of course. And you will have also the regulatory approval processes, which can be super lengthy and costly. And it depends on where you live on the planet. This notion of time can be actually longer depending on where you live. And the impact on orphan drugs is that because rare disease affect only a small number of patients, well, companies will face even higher risks when developing orphan drugs. They invest billions. I have seen the number. I think it's 4.5 times more expensive for developing an orphan drug. So they should invest billions, but may only have a few thousand patients worldwide to buy the drug. This is one reason why companies set those very high price, because they need a return on investment, a recover with limited numbers of sales. So this is the direct impact on orphan drug. Then another aspect is that unlike common disease, we have just mentioned it, rare disease have very small patient population, and there is an impact on clinical trials because it's then more difficult to find enough patients to participate in studies. Trials often need to be conducted internationally to recruit enough people, and this, of course, increasing the cost. And because you have a limited number of participants, it means that you can occur a higher uncertainty in the results, which here again increases the risk of failure. So the impact on orphan drug here is that since you have fewer patients available, the clinical trials are longer, more expensive, and riskier for the companies. And this, of course, is also a reason why you have those final price, which are super high. Then you have another aspect, it's the market exclusivity and the patents. Because once a drug is approved, it usually benefits from market exclusivity for 7 to 10 years. This means that, and you know that, no other company can produce a similar drug during that time. Patents will protect companies from competition, allowing them here again to set prices without any immediate pressure to lower them. They have the monopoly. And actually for orphan drugs, we needed to create incentives for companies to come in the market. So this can actually be extended to 15 years sometimes. And if you have a market exclusivity that is even longer, giving you a monopoly on the treatment, well, this helps encourage investment in orphan drugs for sure, but it means that for you as the payer, the problem is actually prolonged because the prices remain super high for an extended period. Then you have another aspect for the pharmaceutical market. Well, before a drug can be sold, it must be approved by regulatory agencies like the FDA in the US, EMA in Europe. And these agencies review all clinical trial data to ensure that the drug is safe and effective. As mentioned, depending on where you live, this can take very much time. And this approval process is, of course, necessary. As a patient, I'm happy that it exists, but it also slows down access to new treatment. And since rare disease affect fewer patients, regulators often actually allow faster approvals. I don't know if Professor Stevens introduced the notion of early access to therapies this morning.
Very briefly.
But then, just to say a word on that, there exists a mechanism to get earlier access to such innovation, fortunately for the patient. However, early approvals sometimes means less data on long-term effects. So you have a sort of risk here, leading also to uncertainty in pricing and reimbursement decisions. Yeah, so you have definitely with the pharmaceutical market a market of contradictions. The pharmaceutical market is unique because it operates under this delicate balance we have been discussing the whole time. On one hand, you have companies that have temporary monopolies and can set super high prices, and on the other hand, you face strict regulations, huge development costs, and limited patient population with orphan drugs. So by understanding these barriers, you help explain why orphan drugs are so expensive. We are answering our first questions here, and why healthcare payers, you, struggle to balance patient access with financial sustainability. But those questions are actually getting more and more important with the time. If I can give you some numbers here, in 1997, orphan drugs accounted for 4% of total pharmaceutical spending in the US. In 2017, the number rose to 10%, and the projection for 2025 suggests that orphan drug could represent up to 20% of total drug expenditures. So payers face the financial dilemma here. These treatments save lives, significantly improve patient quality of life for some of them, but they are super expensive, and without proper cost controls, healthcare budgets could become unsustainable. And to manage this financial tension, different strategies have been developed to balance access to innovation and budgetary sustainability. And we will, sorry, talk about some of those tools. First of all, you can use risk-sharing management. Sorry, I will drink a little bit because my throat is a bit dry. Yeah, so the risk-sharing mechanisms. One approach is indeed to spread the financial risk across multiple entities, rather than having a single payer to bear the full cost of an expensive treatment. So how does it work? You have, instead of one insurance provider or a government agency, you will pay for a costly treatment through multiple organizations that contribute funds to a shared pool. This approach, of course, reduced the financial burden on a single payer. And in Belgium, for example, we have a specialized fund for rare disease that brings together a contribution from multiple sources, including government health agencies and private insurers, to cover the cost of orphan drug. So you have as an advantage the fact that it prevents a single payer to face unsustainable financial burden. But the limitation is that it requires consistent funding. Then you have, and this is actually the most important one for Zolgensma, very sorry, the performance-based agreement. You pay only if it works. It sounds indeed logical. So payers agree to reimburse, to pay for a drug, only if it proves to be effective in a real-world use. So if the treatment does not deliver the expected result, well, the pharmaceutical company may refund part or all of the cost, or adjust the price based on real-world effectiveness. And an example of those kind of performance-based agreements is the managed entry agreement. Belgium entered an MAA for Zolgensma, actually. So for an MAA, you have a conditional reimbursement. So the drug is covered only if the patient responds well to the treatment. You have a category of patient for which you will pay. So you have some parameters. Outcome-based pricing. So the final price depends on clinical results. And you can also proceed with installment payments. So the drug is reimbursed over several years to reduce immediate budget impact. So the advantage here is that this definitely encourages pharmaceutical company to ensure real effectiveness. It's really, really important. And the limitation is that, well, it requires a complex monitoring system to track patient outcomes. It's not always easy to follow how a patient is responding to a treatment. You need a collaboration. All the stakeholders need to meet at the same table if we want such model to work. And I just mentioned it, but you can definitely defer and make installment payments. So you are basically spreading the cost of the time, like when you are buying a car or something. So how does it work? Basically, you are paying for a multi-million euro drug upfront. Payers, instead of that, payers can spread the payment over several years. It reduces immediate budget pressure. But the problem is that if a patient stops treatment or move to another countries, there is a financial risk. And finally, we have mentioned it earlier too, you can have, price caps and government negotiations. So governments of small countries or countries that have similar populations can come together and negotiate directly with pharmaceutical companies to secure lower prices. So we have the example of Benelux. In France, they have the CEPS, which set price caps on orphan drugs, requiring manufacturers to lower prices in exchanges for broader reimbursement. So it helps secure fair prices and prevent excessive spending. But the limitation here is that lengthy negotiations can delay patient access. Sometimes, indeed, negotiation can take time. And I don't know if I still have time. Yeah, so I'd like maybe to say that the high cost of orphan drugs poses significant financial challenges for healthcare systems. You have understand that. However, a combination of risk-sharing models, performance-based payments, installment plans, government negotiation will help you as a payer to maintain access to innovation while ensuring sustainable healthcare spending. So there is no single solution, basically. That's my message. But a mix of strategic cost control measures can help strike a balance between patient access and budgetary sustainability. And I wanted to finish with a case close to my heart, the case of baby Pia, the spinal cord of my work. It was a turning point in Belgium because baby Pia, and I think Professor Stevens said a word on that case. Baby Pia was diagnosed with SMA, and this actually, her case, brought significant attention to the challenges of funding ultra-expensive treatments. She was diagnosed. Zolgensma in 2019 was not yet reimbursed, neither actually available. So Pia's parents launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise the money. The entire nation mobilized, raising the full amount. But of course, such a case puts some pressure on authorities to accelerate negotiation, create the coalition, the Benelux coalition. Since then, as mentioned, Belgium integrated Zolgensma in a managed entry agreement, and now the treatment is available and reimbursed. So in conclusion, cases like baby Pia matter a lot because they put a spotlight on the real challenges we face with orphan drugs for a disease. When you are a payer, policymakers, you forget those human behind those drugs. You need to stay focused on the most important thing here, the access. So they get everyone's attention, such cases. You have a baby Pia in Turkey, you have a baby Pia in Brazil, it's good. They get everyone's attention from the public to politicians. They push for quicker action and better policies. But mainly these cases remind us why it's so important to find ways to pay for this expensive treatment without breaking healthcare budgets. Today, so as a key takeaways to take with you, we have looked at why orphan drugs cost so much. They're tough to develop. only a few people need them, and there is few competition. We can also even speak of monopoly here. But by using creative solutions like sharing risks, paying only if treatment works, spreading payments out over time, negotiating smartly with drug companies, we can make sure that these life-saving treatments reach the patient who need them most. And in the end, it's all about making sure that everyone has a fair shot at accessing innovative medicines, no matter how rare the condition is, while, of course, and this is mandatory, keeping our healthcare system financially stable. So thank you very much. I don't know if we will have time for questions or anything.
We have 5 minutes for questions. So to all the program participants who are present with us this afternoon, if you have questions, don't hesitate to write them in the chat. In any case, I guess we will continue on some of the concepts you introduced, Sana, during the next talk. I don't see any questions coming in. As this morning, don't hesitate to write up your questions. And if you want to ask them live, we highly stimulate that. And Matthias has already a question. Yes, Matthias.
Yeah, well, it's in fact not a question, but I feel a little bit an obligation to correct one thing. That is that you refer to a threshold, a cost effectiveness threshold, and you mentioned a very high number. I will not repeat it. Well, I can. You mentioned 100,000.
Yeah.
There are guidelines in Belgium for economic evaluation. First was set up in 2008, then 2012, second edition, an update in 2014. We are now busy with another update, which will be published in a couple of months. I'm one of the authors there. And we also look to other guidelines in other countries, what we also did with UNETA, so the European network. There is no threshold of 100,000. The countries that have an explicit one are the exceptions. The exceptions are UK, who has a threshold of 20 to 30,000 pounds, depending on certain conditions. They make exceptions up to 50,000 pounds. That's explicit in their guidelines. So that's in their guidelines for economic evaluations. HICA, our Irish colleagues, are the other exemption. They ask people who present their results to present results with, and most people then say 45, but in fact in their guidelines they mention 20,000 and 45,000 euros. And another guideline that people sometimes refer to, well, it's a guidance document, that's then not their guideline, is the Netherlands. And people then say, oh, it's 80,000. That's also not correct. They make a range, and their range depends on the severity of the disease, which also has specific calculations. And it's very difficult to be in the highest group where they say then maybe 50, 80,000. Most are between 20 and 50,000. But for example, if you go to screening or preventive diseases, which is, well, you're not sick at that moment, then it's in fact up to 20,000 most of the times. I just want to correct this, because we often have this discussion, and that people in submissions, then they say, oh, we are below, and some people even use 200,000, or they refer to another file where the cost effectiveness was in fact ignored, because you say this will never be cost effective, but it's such a severe disease that we want to make an exception. Even that cost effectiveness then would be 400,000. That does not mean then you apply 400,000 for all other dossiers. So it's something, the reason why it's important not just to put it too high. Well, research also in the UK, if they use a very high one and you apply that, then you would never succeed in having your 11% of your GDP. That would be sufficient. If you do that exercise, then you would say, yeah, let's spend 50% of the GDP, and maybe even that is not sufficient. So just for the audience, be very aware of this. There's an implicit threshold in Belgium. Researchers are asked to, if you want further details on that, I can provide it on the cost effectiveness acceptability curve, where you leave it open what the threshold is. It's up to the policymaker to say, for this kind of topic, this is my threshold, and you show the probability that this intervention is cost effective. But for sure, it's not 100,000.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for the correction.
Yeah, you're welcome.